This week, we're looking at furniture made in the second half of the 18th century, when England was the richest country in Europe and she was gradually growing steadily richer. The great landed families lived in a luxury even unequalled at many continental courts, and the increasing number of wealthy merchants did their best to keep up with them. Life was improving for the professional classes too. Their houses might be rather smaller, and they had no room for the grand displays of furniture, but they were lucky enough to live in an age when good taste and good craftsmanship were almost universal. And cabinet makers were well aware of their needs, and furniture was being made at the time for suburban villas, for country rectories, and for small terraced houses in Chelsea and Islington. Furniture which was at once elegant and practical and admirably suited for its purpose. The ease and spontaneity, the more relaxed elegance of the social life under George III seemed to call for a simpler setting. It was a challenge that the cabinet makers of the time readily accepted with enthusiasm. They made tables for almost every conceivable purpose, and some were multi-purpose. Now this, for instance, is a very elegant lady's workbox. She would have perhaps sat here in her elegant house in Chelsea with her needlework, waiting for the first of the morning callers. And here, in the neoclassical style, a gentleman's dressing table. Perhaps he spent an hour or so in front of his mirror in the morning, adjusting his cravat or painting his face with a hare's foot. Now remember that eating habits have always influenced the development of furniture, particularly, of course, tables. In Queen Anne's day, dinner was taken at 1 or 2 o'clock, but it was gradually now getting later and later, and most people needed a midday snack of some kind or other, although lunch, as we now know it, didn't become a formal meal until Victorian times. Family breakfast was usually taken at about 10, and it might consist of steak taken with chocolate or tea or coffee. But ladies often had their breakfast in their own dressing rooms at a table like this, with a cage underneath for the plates and the cutlery. Tea, at this time, had become a national addiction. Now, the formal tea time was actually after dinner, but people took tea really at any hour of the day. It's recorded that Dr. Johnson once had 22 cups of tea in succession, perhaps taken from an urn, just like that, sitting on a table specially made for the purpose. Sheraton designed what he described as a universal table. This really was a multi-purpose table with a long drawer underneath for tea, or coffee beans, or cards, or writing paper, or what you will. Now, as you see it here, it served as a breakfast table, but with one or both leaves pulled out, it became an instant dining table seating up to 8. One of the other characteristic tables of the period was a pembroke, and a point worth remembering, a pembroke is never a pembroke without 2 flaps along the longest edge here. This is a particularly fine example, veneered with satin wood, with a mahogany oval in the centre, and the corners here decorated with amboina. Now, exotic woods like satin wood and amboina are very popular with the fashionable cabinet makers, and they were a byproduct of Britain's vast and expanding sea power, and also of the 18th century passion for exploration and discovery. In 1768, Captain Cook went on his first scientific expedition to the South Seas, and hardly a merchantman sailed without a cartographer to chart new territories, a geologist to look for precious stones and minerals, and a botanist to search for new food crops and flowers and woods. Now, like mahogany, amboina came from the West Indies. This is a little piece of it, easily recognizable because of these very tight little curls. Well, that's from the West Indies. So too came satin wood. You also found it in the East Indies and Guyana. Now, all these are examples of woods that were used for decorative purposes on the furniture of the period. From India came coromandel. This is a part of it. From Africa, we have thuya wood. And then a whole succession of woods came from South America. This is purple wood, otherwise known as purple heart. Zebra wood, given its name for very obvious reasons, as you can see there, though it came, strangely, as I say, from South America, not from Africa. This is kingwood, and that is tulip wood. All these come from Brazil, all used for decorative bandings and veneers. And it was these woods that gave the furniture of the period its great quality and attraction. And then rosewood, instantly recognizable because of its reddish-brown streaks, strong figuring in the grain, and occasional black markings. This came from the Americas and the East, and it gets its name, incidentally, from the scent it gave out when the timber was cut. Now, the Port of London at this time was the busiest in the world. There were unloading facilities even as far west as the Strand, on the very doorstep of many of the London cabinet makers. Ince and Mayhew, for example, had a workshop barely half a mile away in Soho. William and John Linnell had theirs in Berkeley Square. And perhaps the biggest of all, employing 400 men, was George Seddon's workshop in Aldersgate Street. Even closer to the river, as you can see from this map, is St Martin's Lane, just off the Strand itself. At the south end were the premises of Peter Channon and John Bradburn. A little further up, at 60 and 61, Chippendale. A few doors away, William Hallett, who worked for the Earls of Leicester and Pembroke and Lord Folkestone. Next door, Vial and Cobb. William Vial, this was, the man who made furniture for the Crown, including some for Buckingham Palace when George III bought it in 1762. And his partner, John Cobb, who was one of the outstanding cabinet makers of the day. And up in Lichfield Street were the premises of Thomas Johnson, a first-class carver who delighted in the naturalistic forms of the Rococo style and who was particularly fond of including animals in his designs. Well, fine examples of the contrasting work of these two, John Cobb and Thomas Johnson, are to be found at Corsham Court in Wiltshire, the home of the Methuen family since 1745.
My word, Thomas Johnson, naturalistic designs, animal motifs. Just look at this mirror. So he starts off, he gets a hound in here, and now look, there's some of his little waterfalls. The roots of this tree. Up it goes, look at it. Not just laid on the mirror, ties. It's impossible for this mirror to get away from this tree. In and out it goes, carved all the way up. Out comes another branch. See, lovely exotic bird just as landed on there, look at it. And then you notice in and out it still keeps this mirror tied to this foliage. Look at it up the top. All leads up to his favourite, the squirrel. There he sits. And you notice also the cords from which this mirror hangs. Big knot at the top over a huge nail, and the cords coming down, rolled and wrapped round this mirror so that the thing cannot fall. But believe me, that's all carved wood. That's all this man, Thomas Johnson. Well, here, I suppose, is the best-known piece of furniture in this house. It's called the Cobb Commode. John Cobb was cabinet maker to George III and has often been referred to as a man who made only elaborate and most expensive furniture. But what is perhaps not so generally well known is the fact that a distant niece of his, in 1772, married a Methuen, and this was made as a wedding present. Now look at this commode. There it is, just look at it. A very nice feature on the ends. The two families marrying, the armorial there showing the Methuen and the Cobb crest. But look at the front of it. Just look at those doors. Pair of doors there, cross-grained satinwood, all inlaid with this honeysuckle, anthemium, if you like, and the flower heads, and then the oval husks surrounding cross-grained kingwood, and then the marquetry panel there with those carnations flowers in the pretty vase. Truly an elaborate piece of furniture. John Cobb.
Without documentary evidence, it's very often impossible to attribute an individual piece of furniture to the right maker. But one 18th century firm had the very good sense to stamp many of their pieces with their name. Now, this was the firm founded by the Gillows family of Lancaster. Now, here we have a caddy, and there is the stamp that you so often find on Gillows furniture. There it is on the leading edge, Gillows of Lancaster. Now, Robert Gillow began sending furniture to London about 1740 and later opened a branch there with his son Richard, who was to become his partner in 1757. This was described in their ledgers as the adventure to London. Now, Richard was a skilled and highly inventive craftsman, as his books containing drawings and designs reveal. He's credited, for instance, with the original design of the Davenport, which was to become so very popular in the 19th century. And he patented the telescopic dining table and the billiard table. Now, this is a smaller variation on the same theme. It's called a true Madame table, which looks rather like an ancestor of bar billiards. It was made in about 1773 and is thought to be the earliest piece actually stamped with the name Gillows. It's possible, though by no means certain, that George Hepplewhite was actually apprenticed to Robert Gillow in Lancaster. Hepplewhite is yet another of those designers of whom we know very little. Not a single piece of furniture has ever been positively identified as coming from his workshop. Like Chippendale, his name is famous because of the publication of a book of furniture designs, and this is it. His designs were intended, said Hepplewhite, to unite elegance and utility and blend the useful with the agreeable. He does admit, though, that while his drawings are all new, he has deliberately followed what he calls the latest and most prevailing fashion. So it's quite likely that many of the designs are not actually his own originals. The Cabinet Maker and Upholsterer's Guide was published in 1788, which was 2 years after Hepplewhite died, and it ran into 3 editions. Some of his most characteristic designs are for things like this: bow-fronted and serpentine chests, dressing drawers, as he called them. These are 2 plain examples, and on the next page we have one which is a mixture of neoclassical and Rococo decoration on the drawers here. There are also some very fine designs for composite pieces of furniture. This is a piece which Hepplewhite calls a secretary and bookcase, in which the top drawer pulls out and lets down to become a desk. Some of his work is very reminiscent of Adam furniture, but the sofas are very different. Adam sofas were designed for the old school of deportment, for rather straight backs and formal manners, while Hepplewhite's are designed for ease and comfort. Unlike Hepplewhite, Thomas Sheraton was not a professional cabinet maker. He was, in fact, a preacher, an ardent Baptist from Stockton-on-Tees. However, his father made furniture, and he may at some time have done some training in his father's workshop. He published 2 or 3 books on furniture, of which the most famous is this one. It's called The Cabinet Maker and Upholsterer's Drawing Book, and it came out in parts between 1791 and 1794. His designs have all the lightness and elegance of Hepplewhite's, but in general terms he had a preference for straighter lines and rather more rectangular shapes. Now, from time to time he earned his living as a drawing master, and he was obviously fascinated by perspective. He also very much enjoyed ingenious and complex designs, such as this one for the universal table that we saw in the studio earlier. That is the original design for it, intended to double up as a breakfast or dining table. And yet the great irony of all this is, despite the fact that these 2 names are so familiar to us, poor old Sheraton died penniless, and Hepplewhite's fame came only after his death.
Well, I feel sure you've enjoyed seeing those pieces of furniture and listening to Hugh. And I'm going to show you a few more Sheraton and Hepplewhite bits of furniture. But I wonder if you've noticed when you were looking at them with him that we've now got back to lovely slender lines. Oh, well, look at this little table. There's a little writing table in satin wood. There's nothing about this at all except what could be more simple. A little fold-over top like that, lime green baize. Here on the back, you've just got a little pen tray and some ink pots and a little drawer in the front. And that is beautifully signed, stamped with an iron stamp, Gillows, Lancaster. And that's the advert for quality. Lovely firm of cabinet makers were Gillows. And what about this for a table now? Just look at this. Look at the quality of that satin wood top just oozing out. Just look at that quality. And a big, wide tulip wood cross-grain band running all round it. And, you know, I still say this again. I've said it so often. But why is it always people with marvellous tables like this always insist on them, the tops lying flat? Why not turn it up? Why not show it like that so that visitors to your house say, oh, what a table. I know when the top's down, there you see the splay of those quadruple legs. There they are. You can date a table off those splays because you see there's the column where they come straight off the leg and they come straight off like that. That happens only in the 18th century. Round the corner in the 19th century, they come up just the same with little bumps, larger bumps on the tops of the legs, and the larger that lump, the later the table. So really, again, a lovely satinwood table of supreme quality. Now, chairs, of course, there are lots of chairs. Nice shield-back chair here. Not what we call a camelback, not just a chair with a single hump on the top and then going straight down, but a shield-shaped chair. Pierced upright splat, nicely carved with the usual little wheat ears there at the top. And there'll always be some sort of controversy, I suppose, about who designed chairs like this. Both Hepplewhite and Sheraton have them in their books, and I belong to the school which thinks that George Hepplewhite removed the stretchers from underneath shield-back chairs. And so I would prefer to call this a Sheraton chair, if you don't mind, because our friend Thomas Sheraton never removed the stretchers. Here's another nice arm, a nice armchair, nice, about 1800 this, Sheraton again. Got, coming back now, a little slender turn leg, rather pretty. You realise, of course, that all this mahogany that we now see, in fact, all the wood up to this period matured for at least 10 years before it was used. About 8 years cut, lying about, and 2 years then drying out. So that this is the colour of that wood all the way through. You could cut this anywhere, cut it anywhere you liked, and apart from the colour being dry, it's exactly the same all the way through. You see, all these things, one must not forget that all these bits of furniture, every piece of furniture you've seen right from Elizabethan times right up to now, was always brand new when it was made. All that's happened to this chair is it's got old, that's all. Beautiful too for it. Here's another nice type of chair. Now this one is a copy. Now perhaps now we can explain just in a few words the difference now. What you look for when you see two chairs like this and one's a copy. Always pick them up and look underneath. They'll always be all right, everything you see. Get underneath, get and look at these seat rails. There will be four. You see that there? Unstained wood. Dirty, unstained wood. Now, let's look at this fella that we know is a copy. Underneath there, that seat rail, there you can see it. There it is. Look at that horrible black stain, because this would be as white as death unless it was stained. So this is some chap's attempt to simulate age. He can't do it, but he does the best he can. He blacks it up, he knocks it about with a hammer, and he generally plays about it. He says, well, it's not too bad. But there's other things he can't do, because if you look now at the back of this chair, anywhere you see a change in the colour, look down this splat, all the way down there, little white spots, little white edges. You see, this is the soft Honduras mahogany, almost as white as death in its unpolished state. And here it is now, stained up with bichromate, held like that with a veneer of shellac, which we call French polish. But there it is, every knock takes the age off. You can't do that. You can't take the age off of that. So here is the copy. Any change in colour, particularly white edges, any horrible staining underneath to try and make it look old, that's just what it doesn't. It advertises the fact that it is a copy. Here we are, Thomas Sheraton, the man who sort of brought together 5 bits of furniture as a sideboard, because up till then sideboards were really a board or a table in the middle, and either end of it a pedestal on which stood a knife box. Here he's sort of brought them all together and has produced a sideboard. We're always, usually with a deep drawer fitted with a cellaret like that. And this one is just a nice clean bow front board, but from where I'm standing, a lovely bow. Don't buy one with just a skimpy little thing. Have a shape. If you're going to have a shape, let it be serpentine, let it be a bow. Always be nice quality if you've got that. I suppose there are a great number of these about. I know there are. Almost every house I go to, there's one of these. Sometimes they've been gutted and fitted as stationery boxes. How many of them are filled like this one? Just look at that. Now, there's a picture. All of you now, off you go out, quick. Try and complete a knife box. Buy some steel pistol-handled knives, lovely silver pistol-handled knives, and gradually complete the fittings there and fill them up and leave them like that. Look at that. Here's another one, a handover from Robert Adam, of course, and one of his urns. This is about 1780. Just the same, a knife box. And so simple how that thing stands up there. Not by willpower, just because a chap cut two little snippets of wood there, makes little wooden springs, holds that up like that. Imagine this filled like that. Just imagine it. And see how simple it is. You pinch the two springs together, and the thing really almost slides down, just slides down like that. So that's just a nice knife box. Here now, these last two are really something, and really something. Here is a library steps table. You know Thomas Sheraton, he loved mechanical things. He didn't make them, but he drew them on paper, and the great skills of the 18th century cabinet makers allowed a man to make library steps out of a table. Look like this. Those bottom treads, they tuck in there. These, they're held by a ratchet, and they fall down like that. Now, if I can manage this, there's a catch there and a catch here, and this comes right up, and that comes right up. Now, the whole thing should begin to collapse very nicely, very noisily, but nevertheless, down it goes like that. And there is Thomas Sheraton with his set of library steps in what looks to be nothing more than a very pretty knee-hole table. And now I don't know what to say about this. Honestly, I don't know what to say. I won't say an ordinary Pembroke table, but that's what the outline is. Lovely hairwood, smothered with inlay. There it is. And it's what he liked to call a harlequin table. And it really plays all sorts of tricks. There's a hidden spring under here, which pushes that up. And so you've got a secret compartment there, where, unless you know where the spring is, you won't open that, and that can be locked. But here is the fitting, again, with this key, rather noisily. But just look at that. There's Thomas Sheraton really showing off. And believe me, that table, well, I've only ever seen them illustrated in books. Never, never did I think ever in my life I would ever go like that to a harlequin table. That is beautiful.
It really is.
It's fantastic, that table.
And it seems to me that you've been particularly at home in the furniture you've talked about in this programme, Arthur.
Well, one's likes and dislikes creep into this, and this is the period I like more than any other.
Thank you, Arthur. Well, that brings our story to 1800, give or take a year or so, which means, really, in terms of furniture, the beginning of the Regency period. And next week, we're in a world of fantasy, for we're taking you to the Royal Pavilion at Brighton, which houses one of the finest collections of Regency furniture anywhere in the world. Until then, from Arthur and me, goodbye.